This is the new Blackmagic Pyxis 6K. It has a full frame 6K sensor with dual native ISO and open gate recording, Blackmagic RAW for deep integration with Resolve, and natural color reproduction, especially on skin tones. It has a full cloud workflow, as well as flexible monitoring options and dual fast CF Express card slots. But the most important feature here is definitely this physical design. This is their new cinematic box style camera, which alongside the higher end Ursa Cine represents the start of a new generation of cameras for Blackmagic. I've heard from customers so many times over the years how they wish Blackmagic would take their camera technology and just put it into a simple square box design. And the Pyxis is exactly that. And after using it for a little while now, I think this camera is exactly what customers have been after. This is probably my favorite Blackmagic camera design to use yet. It feels great in the hands. It's small, but it's reassuringly heavy, and the build quality itself feels fantastic, which is a real relief considering the low price, of course, of the camera. It's incredibly easy to rig this thing up or down, and it works equally well either way as well. It's a camera that I've just really enjoyed using, and of course which produces fantastic looking pictures. But let's start by looking at it physically. It is this small box shape, which is smaller in person than it looks in the online pictures sometimes. It's designed to be really easily riggable in a variety of ways. So the actual body has lots of these mounting points and screw threads on it. Blackmagic make their own options, of course, for this, like the Ursa Cine top handle, which has 15mm rods to connect their EVF mounting system. But here we're using the Condor Blue cage as it's a modular system, so we can demonstrate quite well just how much you can rig the camera up and down to different styles in order to really transform the camera for those different styles of work. This is possible mainly because of the amount of screw threads on the top and bottom, which are symmetrical, and that is really useful for rigging companies. Then on the right hand side is this blank mounting plate area. Again, Blackmagic makes some of their own pieces to go on here, like a phone or SSD holder, which actually comes in the box with the camera, or the optional rosette plate, which would be great as a simple way to add a side handle. And again, this space is perfect for third-party companies. This is the Condor Blue one, which is a very flexible cheese plate with all kinds of ways of connecting accessories like a NATO rail, cold shoes, screw threads, even a little spirit level, which is quite nice. I also really like the Mid 49 one, as it also has a lot of mounting points and an ARRI rosette, but they also make this little audio breakout cable, which is very smart. It secures nicely onto the plate itself and converts the 3.5mm audio jack and the front mini XLR port into two full-size XLR ports on the back. This is a really exciting blank space, which I'm sure lots of other companies are going to come up with all kinds of other creative uses for. So that's the mounting options. Let's now go over the rest of the camera. On the front is a single mini XLR port for audio and a USB-C port which is labelled Viewfinder, and this is for connecting their monitor options. There are 3 versions of this camera with different lens mounts, and they're sadly not interchangeable. You have to choose the one that you want right off the bat. This version is the L mount, which is the most popular one, as it's a very flexible mount which lets you use adapters to convert to PL or EF very easily. Brands like Sigma and Panasonic also make some really great affordable L mount glass as well. But Blackmagic also make a locking EF mount option and a PL mount option of this camera, just for those people who know that they only really are going to be interested in using their camera with either of those mounts. On the back is the battery plate and ports. It's a Sony BPU style battery plate, which is actually quite a nice middle ground between having large capacities and being powerful enough to actually power a camera like this, but also being small enough to keep the camera small and lightweight. You can of course use Sony batteries from the FX6 or FX9 here, but there are also lots of fantastic third-party options out there. These are two of our favourites. This is the Kinefinity Grip Bat 4S, which is no bigger than a Sony BPA35, but is actually 52 watt-hour capacity rather than 35, and one of the most affordable BPU style batteries out there which we sell. Then this is the Swit LB-SU90C, which is obviously much larger physically, but is 90 watt-hour and has both a DTAP port and a USB-C port for powering accessories. It can also be charged from that USB-C port as well, which is really handy. We were very curious about how long each of these two batteries would last, as we couldn't find any actual power consumption information out there from Blackmagic. So we ran a test with each of these batteries, and here are the results. This was a stationary camera which was filming, recording at 6K at 12:1 compression. On the left-hand side of the battery is the 3.5mm audio input and headphone jack, and then the dual CF Express card slots. And I think customers are going to be very pleased to see CF Express here, as the cost per gigabyte is very good on CF Express nowadays, and the cards are also really fast. But I'm not sure I'm much of a fan of these rubber caps, I can't even get them off, that cover the card slots. They do a really good job of actually keeping the cards safe, but as I just showed, they can actually be quite fiddly. I'd much rather have a spring lever door, like on most other cameras. Then on the right, we have a USB-C port, which can't be used for the monitors. This one is for sending data, either to an SSD for recording or to a phone for internet tethering. There's a 12G SDI port for connecting monitors, a timecode port, which we're very pleased is included. That could easily have been left off when designing this, but it's really useful to have. An Ethernet port for internet access, and then the mains power, which is a 2-pin LEMO. Now let's look at the main operator side, which really is the heart of the camera. This is dominated by this large 4-inch 1080p touchscreen monitor. You could of course use this to view your picture and work from if you want, but for most situations, this is going to simply be in the wrong place to actually view your image with while you're working. Instead, this is going to be a large touchscreen control panel on the side of the camera. This is a fantastic way to access your menus and settings, especially with Blackmagic's menu structure and UI. It's always been very good, and here is no exception. This is easily one of the nicest camera menus to use in the industry. So having a large touchscreen on the camera to actually make the most of it does make a lot of sense, even if it's not that great for actually monitoring your image with in most situations. But we're going to get onto that in a minute. Around the screen are all the controls. Top left is the auto iris and autofocus buttons. To be honest, I'm not quite sure why Blackmagic still put these on every camera. They're always right there in the prime placement as well. I would much rather these were two more assignable buttons, which you could then choose to assign to those functions if you wanted to. I reckon most customers would probably agree with me there. There's then a control wheel, which is of course very useful, a still frame capture button, and the record button. And this is the only physical record button on the camera, apart from the ones on the screens and software, of course. Down the bottom, there's also then ISO, white balance, and shutter speed, 3 function buttons, which I like to set to false color, lookup tables, and peaking. There's focus magnify, a quick button to get into slow motion, which is really handy, playback controls, and the menu button. Then there's actually this really good lock switch, which is really nice and obvious when it's enabled, and also won't get accidentally enabled, which happens all the time on some other cameras out there, and it can be really quite annoying. So that's really quite nice. So if that isn't the best way to monitor your image, then what do you use instead? Well, the primary option is this, the Pyxis monitor. Now this one itself is a very early prototype built for IBC a few weeks ago. This isn't fully functional yet. The camera control doesn't work, no touch screen, it's not color calibrated. But even playing with this really early one, we can tell this is going to be a crucial part of this camera. It's a 5-inch touchscreen which connects over a single USB-C cable and has full camera control and integration with the camera. And it will have exactly the same functionality as that screen on the side, but it can of course be placed on the top or anywhere else you need it. It also has 3 function buttons on the back and 1500 nits of brightness as well, so it's very practical to use outdoors. It really feels like it's an extension of the camera, and in our opinion, it's going to be pretty much an essential purchase if you're looking at the Pyxis. Then there's the Ursa Cine viewfinder, which also connects over USB-C. Although because the Pyxis has only one viewfinder USB-C port, you can't run both this and the Pyxis monitor at the same time. But if you want a viewfinder, this is a great option with camera control on it and function buttons on the top, which are incredibly useful. But if you like having both an on-camera monitor and a viewfinder on your rig at once, it's going to be hard to do that with the Pyxis, because of that single port. And of the two, I think I'd prefer the monitor, as it gives that full camera control and touchscreen menu support. And so for the viewfinder, you could use this Kinefinity Eagle viewfinder instead, over the SDI port and a D-tab. And this way you can have both at the same time, but it will be more cables on your rig, and you'll have to use a battery with a D-tab, of course, like a V-Lock or this Swit LBSU90C. Right, let's talk about the sensor and the image quality. The Pyxis uses the same 36 by 24mm 6K full frame CMOS sensor that is inside the Cinema Camera 6K. So we know what to expect of the image quality. It's very good, with really decent dynamic range, detailed 6K images, and of course all recorded in their fantastic 12-bit Blackmagic RAW codec. This really is some of the best image quality and best in-camera recording that you can get for the money. It is leagues above most other cameras' 10-bit all-eye internal recording. It has a dual native ISO of 400 and 3200, and because it's a taller sensor than most other full-frame video cameras on the market, it can do 3x2 open gate recording, which is becoming quite popular actually as a format by itself, but primarily is useful for two different reasons. The first is cropping to different aspect ratios. You can simply chop off the top and bottom to get your regular 16:9 video. But then if you need to do a vertical version for social media, which is becoming part of nearly every single job now for most people, you get that extra vertical height to play with to stop your vertical video from feeling a bit cramped. The second use is for anamorphic. Pair it with a full frame anamorphic lens and you get beautiful large format anamorphic results. Now, this is something that used to just be crazy expensive to do, as the only people making them were companies like Cooke. But now with the Atlas Mercury lenses and these Blazar Remuses, which are much more affordable, you really can get a large format anamorphic look on a budget. And that was just unthinkable even only a few years ago, really. The dynamic range is good. Everything we shot looks great. There were no challenges for us with dynamic range when we were filming. Blackmagic claimed 13+ stops of dynamic range, which might not sound too impressive for you sitting at home compared to the competition, but Blackmagic always tend to be fairly accurate with their dynamic range claims. As the Pyxis shares the same sensor as the Cinema Camera 6K, we can look at those independent tests for that camera as to how this is going to sit with the rest of the industry. And it is about in line with everything else. Very similar to the FX6 and FX9, a little less than the C70 and less than the Burano. For frame rates, this 6K open gate mode, the highest you can do is 36 frames a second. So it's a bit of subtle slow motion, but it's not that much. At regular 16:9 6K, it is a bit better at 48 frames a second. At 4K crop, it's 60 frames a second. And at 1080p, you can do 120 frames a second. But, by that point, you are, of course, quite cropped in. So frame rates are definitely a compromise here. But overall, the image quality is exceptional. There are a few other compromises to discuss, though. The first is that this is a B-RAW only camera. There is no other codec option here apart from the very compressed proxy files. Blackmagic's cameras used to have a ProRes option in them as well, but on the most recent cameras, they've taken that out. And it is a shame. They say B-RAW is better in nearly every situation, and you know what, it is hard to disagree with them on that. It is fantastic. It's very easy for computers to process in the edit, all of the things that we love about ProRes. But ProRes is still very widely used in the industry, and if you want to use it here, you're going to need to record it externally on a video assist. And that's the same for H.264 and H.265 MP4s as well. The second main criticism that I've seen online, especially with this sensor, is its rolling shutter performance. Now, Blackmagic have stated that it is the same as the Cinema Camera 6K, and in CineD's independent tests, they measured a readout speed of 18.7 milliseconds in 6K DCI, or 25 milliseconds in the full height 3x2 open-K mode. Now, I want to spend a bit of time addressing this, as most people talking about this online don't really give the full perspective here. Firstly, it is higher than we would like it to be. I'm not trying to say otherwise, but I've seen people claiming that it is so high that it's a major problem and even rules the camera out for professional work, and that it's just not true. Let's bring back up that comparison chart from the CineD tests, but with readout speed now rather than dynamic range, so that we can compare it to other common cameras on the market. And to do this, we really need to focus on the 17:9 option, because that's what these other cameras are using, not 3x2 open gate. And as you can see, this sits about in line with those other cameras. The FX6 does stand out here, as it's a really very fast reading sensor. That's one of that camera's main strengths. But the Pyxis is almost exactly the same as the Burano, a bit slower than the Canon C70 and R5C, but it's faster than the Pocket 6K Pro, and it's much faster than the Panasonic S5 Mark II or the Sony A7 Mark IV. And the one I always come back to on here though is the Sony FX9, as that is a much higher readout at 22 milliseconds, and that is a camera which is so widely used throughout the broadcast industry. That's on The Apprentice, MasterChef, Wimbledon, it was used at the Paris Olympics. It's pretty much used across the TV broadcast industry here in the UK. And the Pyxis has a faster readout speed than it. So is it higher than we would like it to be? Yeah, of course it is. But hopefully that shouldn't be a deal breaker for most people. So there are compromises here. But I think it's important to remember the price point of this camera. It is nearly £1,000 less than a Sony FX3 or a Canon C70. Almost half the price of an FX6 or C80 or Red Komodo. Even when you compare it to mirrorless cameras, the Pyxis is not much more than the Panasonic S5 Mark IIX or Sony A7 Mark IV. It's about the same price as the Canon R6 Mark II. This is a lot of camera and a lot of image quality for the price that you actually pay. One area that Blackmagic have really been making strides with in their latest cameras is cloud workflows. They now have a whole cloud platform based around Resolve, and if you aren't familiar with it, we have a live stream with their Resolve specialists where we go through it all in depth. But long story short, it's fantastic, and we're actually now using the remote collaboration features ourselves all the time when making these videos. And the Pyxis fits perfectly with their camera to cloud features. Connect it to the internet with the Ethernet port or by tethering your phone, and you can sync proxy files up to your cloud account and directly into Resolve. And you can either do this manually on the camera or have it do it automatically while you're filming if you get an internet signal, or just when the camera does get an internet signal. They then have a whole UI for this inside the playback menus of the camera. It's all just really easy to use and seamlessly integrated into the camera. So you can easily have someone editing your proxies while you're still filming, and then just simply relink the full camera originals once you're back at the desk and ready to. You can also do RTMP or SRT streaming directly from the camera as well, whether that's publicly to YouTube or similar platforms, or privately as an SRT stream, or directly to an ATEM streaming bridge. It also has Bluetooth, so you can wirelessly control it with the Camera Control app on iOS or Android. So now that this sits in between the Pocket and Ursa lineups, it naturally begs the question, who is the Pyxis actually for? Well, that's hard to pin down, as the answer is pretty much everyone. In reality, if any Blackmagic cinema camera has ever appealed to you, then this small box camera form factor is probably relevant to you. It certainly doesn't replace either the Pocket or the Ursa lineups completely, but I think it does safely claim that middle ground. If you find yourself pushing that pocket design, going for the highest end pocket cameras and rigging them up as well, then you might well be better suited with the Pyxis design. And if you find yourself leaning more towards the larger, more riggable Ursa design and features, but you're looking at the more affordable ones like the 4.6K G2, then the Pyxis could well be a much better choice for you and a significantly smaller one. It really depends on what you need from your camera. If you like to keep things as lightweight as possible and you just don't like using on-camera monitors or rigging accessories, then the all-in-one design of the pockets is still the better choice. And if you're willing to have a much physically larger camera in exchange for more frame rate options, then the Ursa Mini Pro cameras are still worth looking at. And of course there's the Ursa Cine, which is just a whole other world of quality and features, but with a much higher price tag and much larger design. But for the vast majority of customers, we think the Pyxis is going to be that flexible middle ground, which will be the most practical to go for. You can use this nice and small and handheld, or rig it right up when needed. It will be really interesting to see what Blackmagic do with this Pyxis form factor moving forwards, because they tend to use the same physical camera design several times with different sensors inside for different camera generations. Just look at what they've done with the Pockets and the Ursa Mini Pro designs. Fast forward a few years, we could have a whole lineup of Pyxis models. So let us know what you think you'd be interested in seeing them do down in the comments. I'm very curious to hear people's thoughts on that. The Pyxis 6K is a great camera at a really great price. Sure, there's lots of things missing here compared to some of the other cameras, no ND, no autofocus, only RAW recording and limited high frame rate options. We've discussed all of those. But once you take those away, what you're left with here are the really important bits. A physical design which just gets out of your way and works well in a variety of different situations, and really high quality 12-bit Blackmagic RAW recording with good dynamic range and fantastic color reproduction. And all of that for a very competitive price indeed. So let us know what you think of the Pyxis in the comments section, and if you want to buy one or any other kit for that matter, the ProV sales team would be happy to help. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.